Hey everyone, today we're going to start a new body system and we're going to focus on the cardiovascular system this time. So, since we're starting a new system, let's talk about the what, how, and why. What is the cardiovascular system? Well, it delivers oxygen and nutrients to body tissues and carries away waste such as carbon dioxide, and it does this through blood. How does it do this? Well, the heart pumps blood throughout the body in something known as blood vessels. Blood flow actually requires the pumping action of the heart and changes in blood pressure. So we're going to focus on blood pressure this chapter as well. Why is this important? Well, if the cardiovascular system cannot perform its functions, waste actually builds up in these tissues. Body organs fail to function properly because of this buildup in waste. And then, even if oxygen is depleted, they're not going to have enough energy and oxygen to live. So, cells are going to die, and eventually, the body organ can die. So, now that we've had that little picture reference, let's just kind of summarize the important things. One thing to know about the cardiovascular system is that it is a closed system. That means our blood, which is our transport vehicle, is going to be located within certain organs and it's not able to flow all throughout our body outside of these organs. So, organs that hold our blood is going to be our heart and our blood vessels. You're not going to find pools of blood unless for some reason you have a broken blood vessel. So, the whole function of these two major organs of our cardiovascular system is the heart pumps blood, while the blood vessels allow it to be circulated to other parts of our body. The function of the cardiovascular system, if I had to summarize it in one word, is its transportation. It transports oxygen and nutrients, cell waste, and hormones. You need oxygen for cellular respiration, nutrients to be broken down to get you ATP. You always want to get rid of any waste that you have, and it also allows hormones to travel to and from different areas. For example, when your pituitary gland in your brain releases a hormone, it gets to the muscle that it needs to get to by traveling through this blood. Now that we've covered the basics of the cardiovascular system, we're going to spend a majority of this lesson focusing on the anatomy of the heart. It is about the size of a human fist, weighing less than a pound. It's located in your thoracic cavity, so your thoracic cavity, remember, is more of your chest region. It's actually located between the lungs in the inferior mediastinum cavity. So, mediastinum, if you did not know what that is, that's just the middle section of your thoracic cavity, media just meaning middle. In terms of the orientation of the heart, this just means its position. So, how is the heart positioned? Well, there are two major things to look out for. First is apex, and the next one is going to be your base. Your apex is actually the pointed bottom end. And that kind of sounds counterintuitive because when you think of apex, you think of like the top of a pyramid. However, here we're just relating this as the bottom end. It actually points towards our left hip and rests along the top of our diaphragm, which is a big, huge type of tissue that separates our thoracic cavity from our abdominal cavity. And this is about level with our fifth intercostal space or our fifth rib. Our base points, and this is super counterintuitive, our base is not on the bottom. It actually points towards our right shoulder and lies higher than our apex around our second rib. So our base is posterior, so posterior means behind, and then superior means above. So it's kind of behind but above the top part of the heart. And this is where we see a lot of big vessels emerge. So if we were looking at here, down here is the apex of the heart. Notice that it rests on the diaphragm. And then this up here is going to be our base. Notice that our base is actually the top of it where all these big important blood vessels come out of. Here is where we're going to talk about in terms of rib placement. The base up here is almost level with your second rib, while your apex is down here lying around your fifth or so. And then here is just a top view of your heart. Here in the middle is your heart. Your lungs are going to be on either your left or right side. And this is going to be your mediastinum because it's in the middle. Now, in terms of your heart, there are coverings of your heart, just like there was coverings on your nerves, just like there was coverings on your muscle fibers. There's going to be them on the heart, and you're often going to see the ending cardium. So if you hear cardio or cardiovascular or let's see, another one, pericardium, myocardium, all of that's referring to the heart. The first major covering we're going to learn about is the pericardium, and this is a double-walled sac. The first part of this double-walled sac is called a fibrous pericardium, and the second part is your serous pericardium. Your fibrous, this is actually loose. It's the superficial layer, which means it's going to be your outermost layer. And the whole function of it is to protect your heart and anchor it to the diaphragm and sternum. So it helps hold it in place, essentially. From there, your serous membrane is going to be composed of 2 layers. The first layer that your serous membrane is composed into is your parietal pericardium, and then you have your visceral pericardium. Your parietal pericardium is just the outer layer of your serous membrane. And then your visceral pericardium, which is the one we are focused on, this is going to be the one that actually forms part of the heart wall. And the visceral pericardium can also be called the epicardium. So you've heard of the word epi. This is going to be the outer part of the heart wall. So the important part is heart wall here. Now, serous membranes we've learned about when we went over different body membranes located in our body. And serous membranes are filled with serous fluid between the layers of your pericardium inside your pericardial cavity. Now, why do we care about this serous fluid? Well, it allows our heart to beat easily and in a frictionless environment. Our heart is constantly beating. We don't want it to rub against different organs in our body. That would be very painful. So we want a gentle sliding motion for our heart to glide. Here we're going to talk about the ones, and I'm going to show you what we've talked about so far. We've been talking about this pericardium right here, which is our outermost part of our heart. Our outermost layer is our fibrous. Notice here that it's anchoring it. So I'm seeing it anchoring here all the way to my pulmonary trunk. Then I have my serous membrane. So I have 2 layers. I have this layer and this layer of my serous membrane. So the one closest to your fibrous, that's your parietal, and then down here, this is visceral. And this pericardial cavity is going to be filled with that serous fluid. Now notice that your visceral layer is also matches up as your epicardium, which is the outermost part of your heart wall. Next, we're going to talk about this middle part known as myocardium, and then the most innermost part called endocardium, and then you get into your heart. So the walls of the heart. The epicardium is your outside layer. This is synonymous with your visceral pericardium. Your myocardium, myo meaning muscle, cardium means heart. So this is going to be your muscle located in your heart. This is your middle layer. This part actually is what causes your heart to contract. So this is one I'm going to definitely ask on your test. Again, it's going to be made up of cardiac muscle, which is characterized by intercalated discs. And then the innermost layer, endo, is going to be called endocardium. This is lined with endothelium, and this lines our heart chambers. So back at it, our heart wall down here, our epicardium is the outside, myocardium is the middle, and then here's your endocardium forming this white inner side of your heart wall. In terms of that, we have to also learn about the chambers associated with the heart and several of our great vessels. So our heart consists of 4 hollow chambers that hold blood. And these are all lined with endocardium because this is going to be the inside. There are 2 of each of these. So our first type of chamber are called atria, and there are 2 of them. These are going to be located on our right atria, and then we have a left atria. And these are considered our superior chambers, which means our above or our top chambers of our heart. These chambers are going to be considered receiving chambers because they receive blood. Once they receive blood, the blood actually travels and fills our ventricles, which we're going to define down here. And blood tends to actually enter into atria under very low pressure. Ventricles is a word I've used up here, but let's talk about it. There are 2 types as well. There's a right ventricle and a left ventricle. And these are called inferior chambers because these are going to be below on the bottom of our heart. These are sometimes called discharging chambers because these are going to actually discharge the blood and send it to the rest of our body. These are pretty thick because this is actually the chamber that pumps the blood. And so during contraction, blood is propelled out and circulated to whatever organs need to have them. So if we look at this gross anatomy, the ones we're focused on is our atria. Notice our atria here is our one atria. Here's my other atria. They're at the top. If I look at my ventricles, my right and my left ventricle, they're on the bottom. One thing I do want to point out about my right and left ventricle, notice that it's flipped. So even though this says right, if you're looking at the screen, it appears to be left. So when you're looking at an image on the screen, it's going to be flipped. Here, this is kind of showing you how our left ventricle is often bigger and thicker than our right ventricle. Now, our atrium and our ventricle have to be divided because we do not want blood to mix. So there's some things called septums. This divides the heart longitudinally. And there are 2 types. We have interatrial septum and an interventricular septum, and they're named after what they divide. So our interatrial septum is going to divide our 2 atria. So our left atrium from our right. Whereas interventricular septum is going to separate our ventricles from our left from our right. So you can't really see the atria one because it's actually covered by this big, huge blood vessel right here. But we can see our interventricular septum, which is located right here, and it separates our right ventricle, so right here, from our left ventricle, which is over here. The last thing we have to cover is heart valves. This allows blood to flow in only one direction. If we did not have heart valves, we have nothing preventing the blood from actually flowing backwards. And we don't want that. We want it to be like a street. We want cars to go in one direction. And they tend to flow from your atria to your ventricles and then out your great arteries. And the whole point and the whole function of heart valves is to prevent backflow. We don't want mixing of blood. There are 2 major types of heart valves. The first one are called atrioventricular, or also known as AV valves. They get this name atrioventricular because they are between your atrium and your ventricles. Now there are 2 types. One's located on your left-hand side and one's located on your right-hand side. And based on where they're located, they're going to go by different names. The first one on your left-hand side is called your bicuspid valve, or also known as your mitral valve. And that's because it has 2 cusps, or basically flaps. I'm going to point this out on the picture. Your right AV valve is called your tricuspid valve because this one is going to have 3 cusps / valves. And these are actually common names that you're going to hear in anatomy textbooks, even though because they're more specific. The other type is your semilunar valves. This is going to be between your ventricle and whatever artery is attached that it gets pumped out of. So, for example, our pulmonary semilunar valve, which is located from our right ventricle out our pulmonary trunk, pulmonary means that this is going to be sent to the lungs. And then our aortic semilunar valve, this actually separates our left ventricle and our aorta. In case you're wondering, our aorta goes to the rest of the body. So here I kind of want to point out these couple things to you. First, let's talk about our atrioventricular valves. Here, notice our right side actually looks like it's on the left side of the picture. This is our tricuspid valve. The reason it's called tricuspid is because if you look down here, it's attached to 1, 2, 3 areas. Notice it's between your atria and your ventricle, hence atrioventricular. Our other one is called our bicuspid valve because here it attaches 1, 2 cusps. Again, it's between your atria and your ventricles. The next one that we have to talk about is your semilunar valves. So here is our pulmonary semilunar valve. This valve is located between your ventricle down here and then your pulmonary trunk, which is up here. That means blood has to go through this valve and it gets pumped out, and we said pulmonary means lungs. So it's pumped out to your lungs. The other one is your aortic semilunar valve, which is located actually, if you follow the line, right in here. This allows blood located here in your left ventricle to get pumped out here, all the way behind this, out your aorta, which serves the rest of the body. And then today, I'm not going to have you do a Schoology. I'm going to have you focus just on labeling heart anatomy, because understanding the anatomy, when I use these terms to describe how blood flows, it's going to get a lot easier. So that is going to be your homework today, is getting an anatomy labeling sheet and then completing that and starting to study the heart's anatomy. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you guys have a good day.